They called it a death trap. A canyon so narrow, so unpredictable, that even the most skilled pilots refused to fly it. The winds tore through its jagged walls like invisible blades, radar signals vanished into the stone, and every maneuver carried the promise of certain death. Commanders said it was impossible. Pilots shook their heads and walked away. No one wanted to be the one to try. But when the mission collapsed, when lives were at stake and the enemy surged through the cliffs unchecked, there was only one person who stepped forward. She hadn't flown in years. She wasn't supposed to be here. Yet the F-22 Raptor waited for her like it remembered her touch. And when she entered the canyon, the world would never forget her name again. Welcome to the Storyscape, where forgotten heroes rise and untold battles come alive. Wherever you're watching from, drop it in the comments below. We want to know. Now, let's step into the story of the woman who flew where no one else dared. The canyon was carved by time itself, a scar across the desert floor so deep and narrow that sunlight barely touched its base except at noon. From above, it looked almost harmless, just another jagged crack among the endless ridges of sandstone. But pilots who had flown near it knew better. They called it the Widowmaker. Not because of myths or stories, but because of what happened inside its walls. The air currents were a nightmare. Invisible rivers of wind twisted down the channel, colliding in sharp cross-bursts that sent even the best trained pilots into spirals they could never recover from. Radar beams vanished against the rock, scattering into nonsense. Communications dropped to static. Every maneuver had to be flown blind, relying only on instinct, skill, and reflexes sharpened to the edge of survival. Once inside, there was no margin for error. The walls closed in like teeth, and there was no room to climb, no room to turn. A pilot either rode the canyon through to the end, or it became their grave. And more often than not, the canyon claimed its victims. The enemy knew this. That was why they chose it. For weeks, convoys of trucks and armored vehicles had vanished into the shadow of its entrance, slipping beneath satellites and patrol routes. They would emerge miles away on the other side, supplied, reinforced, and untouchable. Strike commanders watched the maps in frustration, their markers showing enemy strength swelling day by day, and they knew exactly why. But none of them were willing to give the order, because the only way to stop the convoys was to fight them inside the canyon. Two pilots had tried. They were among the best the Air Force had, flying Raptors equipped with the latest countermeasures. The mission briefing called it Operation Harrogate. The soldiers on the ground just called it suicide. Both jets entered the canyon on a clear morning. Both had disappeared from the radar after only minutes. No wreckage was ever recovered. No bodies returned. The canyon had swallowed them whole. After that, the order came down from the top. No pilot was ever to attempt the canyon again. On the canyon floor, the soldiers knew the truth better than anyone. A company of them lay low among the rocks, their camouflage torn and stained with dust, rifles clutched tight. They had been ambushed here, forced back into the narrow passages where there was no retreat. Now they were pinned, listening as the sound of engines rumbled through the walls. The noise echoed so strangely that it was impossible to tell where it was coming from. Trucks, tanks, infantry moving above. Every vibration felt like doom sliding closer. The men exchanged glances in the shadows. Sweat streaked their faces, and the air was dry enough that each breath burned their lungs. A few prayers muttered under their breath. Others just clenched their jaws. They knew they were running out of time. Without air support, the canyon would collapse on them, not by rockfall, but by firepower. Command chatter snapped through their earpieces. Static, clipped orders, requests for air support repeated again and again. Desperation leaked into the voices on the other end. "We need birds in the sky. Get someone over that ridge now." But everyone knew the truth. No pilot was coming.
Not here, not now. Then, amid the static, something strange happened. A name was spoken. At first, it was almost a mistake, whispered by an officer who sounded uncertain, a name none of the younger soldiers had heard before. They frowned, glancing at one another, wondering if it was some kind of code word. But the veterans among them stiffened. They remembered. They remembered a mission that was never supposed to be talked about, sealed in classified files, whispered only in hangars and bars late at night. A mission where one pilot, just one, had flown the canyon years ago and come out alive. The details were buried, the reports redacted, but the name lingered, like a ghost. She had been gone for years, retired quietly. No medals, no headlines. She was just another instructor now, teaching cadets in simulators, buried under paperwork and routine. To most, she was nothing more than a faded record, erased from memory. But to those who had seen what she could do, she was something else entirely. As the radio crackled with her name again, the soldiers in the canyon felt a shiver pass through them. Could it be real? Could she actually return?
In command centers miles away, decisions were being made in hushed voices. Desperation left them no choice. The canyon was closing in, and the enemy was moving freely. The maps looked worse every hour. There was only one person left who had a chance, one pilot who had done the impossible before. The call went out, her name spoken officially for the first time in years. And far away, in a quiet corner of a base where no one expected her to matter again, a woman paused. The sound of her name carried through the static, sharp as a blade. She looked up, eyes narrowing, the weight of years pressing down on her. The canyon was calling her back. The first reaction inside the command tent was silence. When her name left the colonel's lips, the younger officers exchanged blank looks, unsure if they had heard it correctly. One of them even leaned over the comm panel and whispered, "Who?" But the older ones froze. They remembered. A flicker passed across their faces, recognition mixed with disbelief. "She's not even on the roster anymore. She's been gone for years." "Get me her file," the colonel ordered, his voice low but hard. "If anyone can thread that canyon, it's her." The staffers moved quickly, screens lighting up with restricted access warnings, old files buried beneath layers of clearance. When her profile appeared, it wasn't much, a single photo of a younger woman in a flight suit, brown hair tucked under a helmet, eyes sharp with the kind of intensity you couldn't fake. Underneath were just a handful of words: classified, mission redacted. The colonel stared at the screen. He didn't need the details. He already knew. She was the only one who had flown the canyon and lived. When the call reached her, she was standing in the corner of a hangar, clipboard in hand, checking off maintenance logs. She wore no rank insignia anymore, just the plain green jumpsuit of an instructor. To the cadets who passed by, she was simply "ma'am" or the old trainer. None of them knew who she really was. The comm crackled, her name spoken through the static like it had been waiting years to be said again. She stopped moving. Her grip on the clipboard tightened until her knuckles whitened. Slowly, she lifted her head. Around her, the cadets kept laughing, joking, unaware. But her eyes narrowed. The canyon. They were calling her back. She set the clipboard down and walked, each step steady, as though she had been waiting for this moment. By the time she arrived at the forward base, the soldiers already knew. Rumors travel faster than radio waves. Men who had been ready to die in the canyon now stood straighter, whispering her name with a mixture of awe and doubt. Some didn't believe she was real. Others swore their fathers had told them stories about her.
the pilot who had done the impossible.
When she stepped off the transport truck, conversation died. The air itself seemed to hold still. She was older now, her hair sun-kissed brown with faint streaks of gold, her face weathered but striking, her eyes carrying the weight of battles most of them couldn't imagine. She didn't stride like someone chasing glory. She walked like someone who already knew what it cost. The young soldiers expected a legend, someone untouchable. Instead, they saw a woman of flesh and blood, carrying herself with a quiet power. That was what made them fall silent. That was what made them believe. Two men at the edge of the line snapped to attention and saluted her without being ordered. Within seconds, others followed. A row of helmets dipped in respect as she passed, and for a brief moment, the canyon's shadow didn't seem so dark. Inside the hangar, the F-22 waited. Its nose bore the freshly painted shark mouth, jagged teeth grinning as if it too remembered the taste of battle. The ground crew hovered nearby, their faces tight with nerves. No one had been willing to push the jet into that canyon again. But when she stepped forward, even the mechanic shifted, parting to let her through. Her gloved hand touched the cold metal of the fuselage. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Memories struck, wind tearing at her body, stone walls flashing by in blurs, the sickening silence when her wingman's voice cut off forever. She had sworn she would never do it again. But promises didn't matter anymore. Lives were on the line. She climbed the ladder and slid into the cockpit. The seat embraced her like an old enemy, familiar and unforgiving. Systems hummed to life around her, the displays lighting her face in cold green and amber. Her fingers moved across the controls, not with hesitation, but with muscle memory that no years could erase. A voice crackled in her headset. "Command here. Confirm. You're really going in." She looked out through the canopy, past the hangar doors, to the distant line of rock rising against the horizon. The canyon waited, silent and merciless, her lips parted, voice low but steady. "Confirm. I'm going in." And with those words, the impossible suddenly felt possible again. Engines screamed to life with a thunder that rolled across the base and echoed into the desert. The F-22's twin afterburners lit up, casting molten light against the hangar walls as the jet taxied forward. Every soldier who wasn't in position stopped to watch. They had seen Raptors take off before, but not like this. Not with her at the controls. Outside, the canyon waited on the horizon, a jagged scar cutting across the earth. Dust rose in shimmering waves from the runway as ground crew scrambled out of the way, shielding their eyes against the heat. The shark-mouthed fighter seemed almost alive, snarling as it lined up for departure.
In the cockpit, she lowered her visor. Her hands moved over the controls with a calm precision that no one else could match. Every dial, every switch felt like an extension of herself. The headset crackled with the voice of command. "Eagle 1, you are go for launch. Godspeed." Her lips tightened. She didn't need speeches. She just needed the canyon. She pushed the throttle forward. Flames erupted behind the Raptor, and in a heartbeat it leapt from the ground, wheels lifting as the desert blurred below. The shockwave rolled over the watching soldiers, rattling their helmets, kicking up dust around their boots. They stood transfixed, some shielding their eyes, others following the jet until it became a gleaming arrow cutting toward the horizon. For the soldiers trapped inside the canyon, the sound arrived seconds later, a distant roar, faint at first, then growing, reverberating through the stone walls. Men who had been crouched low suddenly lifted their heads. Eyes widened. Hope flickered where there had been none. One private whispered, half in disbelief, That's her, isn't it?" No one answered. They didn't need to. Inside the cockpit, she scanned her displays. Radar painted nonsense, just as she expected. The canyon scrambled everything. She flipped the systems to manual, trusting her instincts. The HUD glowed faint green against the endless red rock rising ahead. The F-22 purred beneath her, eager, restrained only by her control. Her breathing slowed. She remembered the first time. The panic of losing contact with her wingman, the walls rushing closer, the weight of knowing the canyon wanted her dead. She had survived then not because of luck, but because she had listened. To the winds, to the subtle shifts of air pressure, to the instincts that no machine could replicate. Now, she would listen again. Approaching entry point, she reported, though her voice was more for herself than for command. She doubted the signal would last much longer. Ahead, the canyon yawned open like the throat of some great beast, shadows stretching across the desert floor. The jagged ridges cut the sunlight into shards, painting the rock in alternating stripes of gold and black. It was beautiful in a terrible way, like a cathedral built by gods who demanded blood. Her knuckles tightened on the stick. She angled lower, afterburners flaring, and the jet screamed toward the opening. On the canyon floor, soldiers scrambled to their feet as the roar grew deafening. Helmets tilted skyward, eyes searching the narrow slit of sky above. The sound rattled the very stones around them. And then for a split second, they saw it. A silver shape cutting across the sky, shark mouth blazing, contrails trailing fire. Some men raised their fists, others simply stared. One veteran snapped to attention, hand at his brow, saluting as the Raptor vanished into the shadows. His comrades followed suit, a silent line of respect amid the dust and fear.
The enemy heard it too. Convoys braked, turrets lifted, eyes turned upward. They had expected no one to dare. Now they scrambled, shouting orders in panic, firing blindly at the roar tearing through their sanctuary. But by the time the first shots echoed, she was already inside. The canyon swallowed her whole. The instant she crossed the threshold, the world changed. Sunlight vanished, replaced by jagged shadows that sliced across the canopy. The walls closed in around her like the ribs of a giant beast, and the turbulence hit, sudden, violent, invisible. The Raptor jolted hard to the left, alarm screaming as the airflow ripped across its wings. But her hands didn't shake. She had expected this. Every gust was like an old enemy greeting her with claws. She leaned into it, correcting with micro-movements, feeling the stick as if it were an extension of her pulse. The canyon was alive. It wanted her dead. Her HUD flickered, radar blips appearing and vanishing as though mocking her. She switched it off. The machine couldn't help her here. This was a place for instinct, not code. Her eyes traced the walls, measuring distances at a glance, mapping every curve and bend in the rock with the precision of memory. A sharp crosswind slammed her sideways, the Raptor's wingtips coming within feet of the stone. Sparks leapt as a pebble scraped across the fuselage. The jet screamed in protest, but she held steady, jaw clenched, eyes unblinking. Steady, she whispered to herself, voice calm. You've done this before. Below, the soldiers heard it, the roar of engines reverberating through the stone. Some ducked, others looked up in awe as contrails flashed briefly across the slit of sky. Each pass sent dust raining down, but not a single man flinched. Hope was louder than fear. The enemy, however, panicked. Trucks lurched to a halt inside the canyon corridors, their gunners swiveling wildly, trying to track a jet that moved faster than their eyes could follow. Machine gun fire rattled against the cliffs, sparks exploding uselessly against stone. Rockets launched into the air, but the walls betrayed them, detonating prematurely in showers of smoke and debris. And through it all, she flew like a shadow, threading impossible gaps, twisting through hairpin turns that no simulator could replicate. Her memories flashed in fragments. The last time she had been here, her wingman's voice had filled her headset, calm at first,
then sharp, then gone. She had flown out alone, haunted by silence. She had sworn never again. But this time was different. This time soldiers lived or died depending on her choices. This time failure wasn't just her loss, it was theirs. Her jaw tightened as the first heat-seeker warning blared. A missile streaked toward her from the cliffside, fired from a hidden launcher buried in rock. She yanked the stick, flares spilling behind her like molten sparks. The missile bit, veered, and exploded harmlessly against the canyon wall. The shockwave slammed her forward, rattling the jet, but she pushed through. More came. 2 streaks of fire cutting through the shadows. She dove, wings scraping inches from the rock, the jet howling in protest. One missile shattered against the wall. The other stayed locked. It closed fast, relentless. She didn't flinch. Instead, she rolled the Raptor, flying inverted for a heartbeat as the canyon opened briefly. The missile overshot, crashing into the cliffs, detonating in a roar that sent boulders tumbling like dice. Dust choked the air. The sky above vanished. For a moment, it was like flying blind through the heart of an earthquake. Her breath slowed. Her pulse did not. The soldiers saw the explosions from below, their helmets shaking as stone fragments rained around them. One private looked at his sergeant in disbelief. "She's still in there." The sergeant, a man who had seen too much to believe in miracles, simply nodded. "She's not coming out until it's done." Deeper inside, the canyon twisted into a razor-thin pass. Even the F-22 seemed too wide for it. She dropped throttle, hugging the air currents, each movement measured by instinct. Her eyes scanned constantly. One wrong angle, one hesitation, and the stone would tear her apart. And then, movement. Ahead, she saw it, the convoy. Trucks wedged into the canyon floor, weapons mounted on their backs, men scattering in panic. They hadn't expected anyone to come. Not here, not now. Her lips tightened into something between a smile and a snarl. Target acquired. Her finger hovered over the trigger. The jet shuddered as its cannons opened fire. The sound was less a weapon and more a roar, a thunder that filled the canyon and drowned out every other noise. Bullets tore through trucks, ripping steel apart, scattering men into the dust. Explosions lit the shadows, orange flames dancing against the red rock. Below, soldiers pressed against the walls, shielding their faces as the canyon itself seemed to split apart. But when they looked up again, what they saw wasn't chaos. It was salvation. The convoy burned. But the canyon wasn't done. The turbulence hit again, stronger, crueler, as if the very earth was trying to throw her out. The jet rattled, alarms shrieked, but she refused to yield. Her voice came low, steady into the static. "I'm not leaving until they're safe." And with that, she drove the Raptor deeper, fire trailing behind her, the Widowmaker itself howling in defiance. The canyon was burning.
Columns of smoke curled upward, trapped between the sheer stone walls, turning the sky into a choking haze. Fire licked at the jagged cliffs, casting monstrous shadows that danced across the rock like the ghosts of every pilot who had died here before. The wreckage of trucks and armored vehicles smoldered below, their twisted metal husks glowing red from the heat. Ammunition continued to cook off, exploding sporadically in bursts that echoed like distant thunder. From her cockpit, she saw it all. Flames consuming the convoy, enemy fighters scattering like ants, the canyon floor turning into a graveyard of steel and ash. She had done what no one else dared, but it wasn't over. The canyon wasn't finished with her, and neither were the men who had built their stronghold within it. Her threat alarms blared again, sharp pulses in her ears. She jerked her head to the right and spotted the flare of rocket trails streaking toward her from the cliffs, hidden launchers camouflaged among the rocks. They had been waiting for her. The first missile screamed past her wingtip, detonating against the canyon wall and sending an avalanche of boulders into the void. She pulled hard on the stick, the Raptor groaning as she twisted the jet sideways, slipping between two falling slabs of rock that would have crushed her in an instant. Sweat stung her eyes, but her grip never faltered. "Not today," she hissed through clenched teeth. Two more missiles locked on, their exhaust flames glowing like twin suns against the smoke-darkened sky. She throttled forward, diving lower, weaving between the canyon walls at speeds no one believed the F-22 could survive. The missiles closed, relentless, their seekers hungry for her heat signature. She cut throttle, released countermeasures. Flares burst behind her like crackers in the night. One missile bit, veered, and vanished in a bloom of orange. The second held steady. It screamed closer, faster, until its roar merged with her own engines. Her instincts flared. She yanked the stick, rolling the Raptor upside down, flying inverted only feet above the canyon floor. The missile overshot, slamming into the stone ceiling, the blast shaking the canyon like an earthquake. Debris showered down, smashing onto the convoy remnants, silencing what little resistance remained. Down below, the soldiers trapped on the canyon floor had front-row seats to a spectacle they would never forget. They had seen her appear from nowhere, swooping down with the fury of a storm. They had seen her guns tear through armor as if it were paper. They had seen fire bloom from her rockets, each explosion lighting the canyon in bursts of daylight. Now they watched her twist and dive, outmaneuvering death itself. One young private, face blackened with soot, whispered to no one in particular, "She's not even human. No one flies like that." The sergeant beside him shook his head, eyes locked skyward. "No, she's better than human. She's the reason we're still alive."
As they watched, she soared past again, low enough that the shockwave knocked them off their feet. Dust blasted into their eyes, but none of them cared. They were witnessing the impossible. And then something unexpected happened. Soldiers across the canyon floor, men who'd been pinned down and beaten to the brink of surrender only minutes ago, began to rise. One by one, they pushed themselves upright, rifles forgotten for the moment, helmets tilted back, eyes searching the ribbon of sky. And as she dove past a second time, slicing through smoke and fire, hands moved instinctively to brows. Salutes snapped upward, crisp and sharp, a line of respect carved into the chaos. It wasn't ordered, it wasn't rehearsed, it was raw, instinctive reverence. The canyon had been their tomb. She had turned it into their deliverance. But above, the fight raged on. Enemy commanders weren't ready to lose their sanctuary. More rockets flared. Tracer fire arced from concealed nests along the ridges. She could see the muzzle flashes sparking like fireflies on the walls. The canyon was alive with hatred, spitting fire in every direction. Her teeth clenched as she pulled the jet higher, riding the razor's edge of the walls. Each burst of gunfire streaked past her canopy. Tracers so close she could see their trails burn across the glass before vanishing. The Raptor responded like a living thing. Every adjustment of the stick sent it rolling, diving, twisting through gaps no engineer had ever intended. She didn't just fly the jet, she wore it, became it. Together, they were something more than human, more than machine. They were the answer to the canyon's curse. Another threat alarm screamed. This time, it wasn't ground fire. Her sensors picked up a new signal, fast, climbing, closing from above. She craned her neck and saw it. A hostile aircraft had dared to follow her in. A flash of dark metal against the sky, the silhouette of an enemy fighter that shouldn't have been able to survive here either. But desperation makes men reckless. Her lips curved into a grim line. "You shouldn't have come."
She throttled up, the Raptor howling as it clawed for altitude, dodging the next cascade of tracer fire. The enemy jet rolled in behind her, guns flashing, rounds sparking against the canyon walls. It was suicide to dogfight here. No room, no sky, only walls waiting to tear them both apart. But she didn't hesitate. She dove again, dragging her pursuer lower, deeper, daring him to follow. The canyon bent sharply, stone narrowing to a knife edge. She threaded the gap, inverted, wings skimming so close they kicked dust off the cliffs. Behind her, the enemy pilot hesitated for a split second too long. The canyon claimed him. His jet clipped the rock, shredding into a fireball that lit the walls in a hellish glare. The explosion thundered like a god's judgment, shaking the canyon floor. The soldiers below shielded their faces as flaming wreckage rained down. When the smoke cleared, only one jet still flew. Hers. Breath rasped in her chest, sweat rolling down her temples, but her eyes were steady. She had done the impossible again. Her headset crackled faintly, barely clinging to reception through the stone. A voice broke through, filled with awe. Copy, Raptor 1, Canyon corridor is secure. Repeat, secure. She exhaled slowly, the first true breath she had taken since entering, but she didn't smile, not yet, because the canyon wasn't finished with her until she got her people out. And so, engines roaring, wings still shuddering with heat, she pushed the jet deeper into the Widowmaker's throat, determined to carve a path wide enough for every soldier still standing. The canyon was silent now, silent in the way a battlefield becomes once the fury has passed. Smoke curled lazily between the stone walls, drifting like ghosts above the wreckage. The smell of burning fuel and scorched metal clung to every breath. Echoes of gunfire and explosions still rang in the ears of the soldiers below, but in the silence that followed, only one sound mattered: the steady roar of her engines circling above them. They looked up, dust-streaked faces turned skyward, eyes straining to follow the gleaming shadow that sliced across the narrow strip of light overhead. Some had tears burning in their eyes, though none would admit it. Others simply stood, helmets tucked under their arms, spines straight. They had been trapped in a tomb, and she had pulled them back into the world of the living. "Command, this is Raptor 1. Her voice crackled through the comms. Calm, controlled, though fatigue tugged at the edges. "Canyon corridor neutralized. Ground forces can move." For a moment, there was only stunned silence on the other end. Then the channel erupted with disbelief, with voices shouting confirmations, with commanders demanding to know if it was true. Screens lit up in operations centers miles away as feeds from drones and satellites caught glimpses of fire plumes rising from the canyon's heart. The impossible had happened. On the canyon floor, the soldiers began to move. Step by step, they emerged from their cover, rifles still in hand but no longer shaking. Some paused to glance upward one more time. A sergeant, his face lined with dust and age, removed his helmet and held it at his side, head tilted back. Slowly, he raised his hand in salute.
Others followed. Within moments, a line of men stood in the canyon's belly, saluting as her jet roared past overhead. They didn't care that she couldn't see each of their faces. It wasn't for her eyes. It was for their own hearts. It was their way of saying that what she had done mattered, that it would be remembered long after the smoke cleared. In the cockpit, she caught a glimpse of movement below. Tiny figures standing straight, hands raised in salute. A muscle tightened in her jaw. She said nothing, but her eyes lingered for a heartbeat longer before turning back to the controls. Her fuel was low. Her body ached. Sweat soaked her flight suit, clinging to her skin. She could feel the tremor in her arms now, the exhaustion pressing down. But she kept her voice steady. "Command, I'm bringing them out. Hold your birds until they're clear." With precise movements, she guided the jet back through the canyon's twisted arteries, deliberately slower this time, her afterburners lighting the way like torches. Above her, the sky was a narrow strip of gold, fractured by smoke and haze. Behind her, on the canyon floor, the soldiers began to march, following her path like pilgrims behind a beacon. The enemy was broken, their stronghold shattered. A few desperate stragglers fired potshots from the cliffs, but none of them lasted. Each attempt was silenced swiftly, either by the jet's cannon or by the emboldened soldiers below. The canyon that had once been a trap was now theirs to cross. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. At last, the jagged walls opened and the canyon spit them out into the open desert. The sunlight struck them full force, blinding, searing, but it was a welcome pain. For the men who stumbled into the light, every step forward was a miracle. Waiting convoys rushed forward to meet them. Medics sprinted across the sand. Commanders barked orders that dissolved into half-shouted prayers of thanks. For the survivors, it was over. Above, the Raptor climbed, banking in a slow arc. Her eyes scanned the horizon, confirming what she already knew. The enemy had been denied their sanctuary. The mission was finished. "Raptor 1, return to base," Command's voice finally broke through, laced with something it had never carried before: reverence. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes lingered on the soldiers below, now safe, now alive because of her. She saw them gathered in clusters, some hugging, some simply collapsing in the sand. A few still saluted her silhouette against the sun. Her lips parted, but only a whisper escaped: "You're safe now." When she landed, hours later, there was no fanfare. There were no cameras, no medals waiting, no speeches prepared. The base was buzzing with disbelief, with quiet awe, but no one dared to break the spell by trying to make it into something political.
She shut down the jet, slid the canopy back, and climbed down the ladder. The ground crew stared at her as though they were seeing something not quite real. She removed her helmet, tucking it beneath her arm, her brown blonde hair damp with sweat, her expression unreadable. And then, slowly, one of the mechanics stepped forward and snapped to attention, saluting sharply. Another followed, then another. Within seconds, the entire line of crewmen stood in silence, saluting her as she walked past. Not because they had been ordered to, because they couldn't do anything else. She nodded once in return. That was all. Later, when the reports were filed, the official language was sterile. Canyon corridor secured. Enemy neutralized. Allied forces extracted. There was no mention of her name, no details about how it had been done. Classified, redacted, buried beneath layers of secrecy just as before. But the soldiers who had walked out of the canyon didn't need reports. They carried the memory in their bones. In quiet moments, they would speak of the woman who flew where no one else dared, whose Raptor had cut through the Widowmaker like a blade through smoke. They would tell the story in whispers, in barracks and camps, and those whispers would spread. And when her name was spoken, even years later, men who had been there would straighten unconsciously, hands twitching toward brows as if ready to salute all over again. As for her, when the debriefing ended, she slipped away as quietly as she had arrived. No interviews, no speeches, just a woman walking across the tarmac at dusk, helmet under her arm, the fading sun painting her silhouette in fire. For a brief moment, she glanced back toward the horizon. The canyon lay hidden in that direction, cloaked once more in silence,
as if nothing had ever happened there. But she knew better, and so did everyone else. Because they had said no one could survive the canyon, and yet her Raptor did.